deliver on the aspects of the work that we are looking at. So those are the three aspects that I would like to discuss, and we can discuss further some of the points in the groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wande, and the wonderful three interventions from the experts. Also, they're talking on the respective sub-themes. And since the time is quite limited, normally we thought, that we should go to the Q&A session directly, but before doing that, since they spend their times and also all travel to Bonn just for us. So if you have any other questions, or anything you would like to say, as a part of your interventions before we open up the floor, or of course, if you want to ask the questions to the other panelists, now is the time. Or otherwise, I will ask the one question, because there are lots of questions regarding the personal capacity versus institutional capacity, and lots of programs, especially training, education, capacity building, support. Normally, the builds up the personal capacity, but it's always sometimes in my own understanding, even though I'm not the specialist for capacity building, there's some difficulty to maintain the capacity within the institution. So in order to maintain and keep the institution capacity in-house, what are the actual kind of a model case of best practices you have observed in your profession? Who can take the floor? Oh, that's a question to all three of you.
I will start from the point that Webster began to raise regarding involvement of finance and planning institutions in adaptation planning processes. So in the context of NAPS, for example, one of the early stages that we support countries with is actually setting up a mandate, a coordination mechanism for taking the national adaptation planning process forward. And that involves a multi-stakeholder, setting up a multi-stakeholder scenario, assigning specific mandate to an institution, making sure that there's a mechanism for the different sectors and that institution to regularly convene, co-own the process, but also make clear who's in charge and who can take it forward. So setting up those kinds of institutional mechanisms, for example, we find, and especially engaging ministries of finance and planning in the process of adaptation planning, quite useful in retaining institutional capacity.
Thank you very much. You have something to add, Mandy?
Thank you. I'll reflect on the question from the point of view of our accreditation process with the Green Climate Fund. And it's, I think, interesting to note that SANBI did our accreditation application in-house. So we didn't have external consultants to help us. We had an incredibly supportive CEO, Chief Executive Officer, and involved the whole institution in the process, which involved policy changes, system changes, etc. So I think, again, it comes to process. How do we do what we do? It's not about the product. It's about the way we do things.
Thank you. Mr. Wande, you have something to add?
Yeah. Thank you. Last year, we did some work in Botswana, which predominantly involved conducting interviews with ministries of water, ministries of finance, environment. And it emerged that there was a capacity gap in terms of developing proposals that could be sent to financiers. And part of the solutions that the government of Botswana suggested at that time, I don't know if this has been carried out, was that instead of having different ministries developing proposals, what they needed was really an office for project development that would have 5 to 6 people. And with that capacity, even if one individual leaves, what you are left with actually still individuals that you have capacity, and you can still have a turnover of staff within that kind of setting, but it would still allow further retention of the skills that are needed within that kind of office. So I think that I thought that was just an innovative way of retaining skills within an institution for a particular exercise.
Wonderful, Webster. Probably.
So now we would give the floor to you, if you have any questions. Jamaica, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick answer to the question from the co-facilitator. Yeah, you do lose people. People migrate within countries, but I don't think the capacity is lost. Maybe it goes to some other country. But one way that we have addressed this problem in my country is that if you receive training, then you're bonded. You can't leave the government position, or you have to pay a bond. So if you do a first degree or something, you are bonded for 5 years that you have to remain in government. I don't think it's, well, I think probably the same thing in the private sector, but that's one way of doing it. Another way is that you utilize these people when they have built their capacities and they become trainers. And so they train other people within the government system so that they can continue the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamaica. Costa Rica.
Thank you, Madam. It's actually a comment, I mean, to the experts and to the colleagues. My concern is more about the creation of capacities and complementary capacities, especially when we consider the implementation of the 3 different instruments, NAPs, NDCs, and SDGs. I mean, all of them are very important. I mean, these are agendas that reinforce each other. So that's something that my delegation strongly believe. I mean, we need to highlight in our discussions. Beyond that, I mean, it's important not only. I mean, it's important also to coordinate efforts and align all the national goals and the indicators. I mean, related to these different instruments. This March, there was a meeting in the UN where the Secretary Espinosa joined the President of the General Assembly in New York. I mean, on how we can complement. I mean, how the Agenda 2030 and the Paris Agreement can complement each other. There were some interesting conclusions. And this event was important, I mean, in order to create the political momentum. There is, however, a need to bring that down to the expert level and start working on developing those national capacities and personal capacities. I mean, to ensure that the implementation of these 3 instruments are going to be effective and efficient, and is actually going to fill the gaps at the different levels in our countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Colombia. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Madam Co-Facilitator, and thank you all for these very interesting presentations. I would like to make a question to Mrs. Jalila from UNDP with regards to the role of the UN agencies and in general the multilateral institutions. The question would be, what would you recommend the UN agencies and multilateral institutions to truly integrate the impacts of climate change and adaptation measures in all their development processes and projects? As we see it, this is a process that comes in 2 ways. Governments can send clear signals on this coherence that we need to start. And we know that these agencies are already integrating and taking into consideration what we have done under the UNFCCC, but how can we really accelerate this process of integration? Thank you.
Thank you. Espen?
Thank you very much. In response to Kuni's question and following up from Jamaica's comment, we've had a very successful program in the Pacific called the Regional Technical Support Mechanism, which was able to deploy technical assistance to countries where they were lacking capacity. But we also ensured that any such technical experts that were deployed, they were from the region. They also needed to have a national counterpart when they were carrying out their work. While not perfect, that sort of capacity supplementation does have at least a better impact than fly in, fly out. I also wanted to make a few comments about the presenters who I thought were very informative. The idea of having a greater UN coordination, I think we would all welcome that. How it will be done in practice, we still see a lot of competition amongst UN agencies, so any practical means of getting that done would be very welcome. In terms of monitoring capacity building in the long term, we found this to be extremely difficult because most of the projects on capacity building are short-term and funding runs out, say, after 5 years. But you need to monitor the capacity over a much longer period than that. That's a challenge that we're facing, and I'd like to hear some views from the representative of Zambia, how maybe they were looking at dealing with monitoring capacity retention, I guess, in the longer term. And finally, I totally agree with the point that was made about tertiary education. And while the GCF did fund some scholarship early on, when we submitted a project for Vanuatu, unfortunately that element was removed.
Thank you. Senegal?
Thank you for the presenters, and I would just like to appreciate what have been put forward earlier. And then I would just like to, it's not a question, it's more of a request maybe, in a way that to strengthen capacity throughout national focal points, for instance, in developing countries, in order for them to actually help them to formulate, for instance, projects to the GCF. I believe we have to do it in a more concrete matter, in a more concrete way. So why not inviting them in a meeting or in a workshop where they would definitely have, or they would be taught how to formulate projects, so that's concrete actions. So, because then throughout our respective meetings, what we've heard internally was that people are actually struggling to actually access to the funds. And it's taking time. Some of them had formulate them, and they're probably not doing it the right way. So I believe that it will be quite important to actually have them in a forum where they will be taught how to do it, A, B, C, D, and at the end, well, you know what, there you go, you can definitely, send it to the GCF in order for you guys to access the funds and start implementing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we give the word back to our panelists for their final comments and answers. Thank you.
Okay, so let me address the question from the delegate from Colombia. Thanks for the question. So one point I would make is something I've said already, which is we've found, with climate change, typically Ministry of Environment is the custodian, or if there is climate or in energy ministry, more of late. But we found it was crucial, again, to involve coordination ministries and central macroeconomic planning ministries. So involvement of ministries of finance and Ministry of Planning for any setup of an institutional mechanism to take forward adaptation action, whether it's planning or developing a large sectoral projects later on. That's important. Secondly, also in this realm of how you set up your institutions, beyond one institution being responsible for taking an implementation process or a planning process forward, just involving all 9 ministries, creating a mechanism where they would have a dialogue on a regular basis, including with non-state actors represented in that coordination mechanism. That helps with that integration agenda. That strongly helps the integration agenda. Another effective way we've seen in a number of countries is to involve high-level offices, Prime Minister's office or a Vice President or President's office in the process. That keeps the issue of climate change and the necessity to mainstream into macroeconomic plans high on the agenda and therefore would get the support and sustaining that it needs. Lastly, a point I would suggest is economic valuation of the value of taking adaptation action. This is an important work that needs to happen, and we do assist countries in that realm. That's one of the training areas that we strongly work in. The reason being the economic argument always wins the day. One needs to quantify and make stark what is the economic cost of not taking adaptation action, and that tends to convince the right actors and industries and sectors within a country. So that doing that kind of analysis work and backing backing your actions with that kind of economic analysis rigor is a very effective way. And in answering this last point, in raising this last point, I would also relate it to the question from Senegal, who asked about how one would develop an investment-ready, how would countries prepare investment-ready projects? How could they be assisted in that? In fact, we have developed, again, in the capacity building program, a very comprehensive financing and project development module, which I have included in my presentation. If you go online, UNDP does have a module that it has recently developed with USAID, the Asian Institute for Technology, and recently rolled out in Asia, in Bangkok, but we are trying to also have it available in Latin America, Africa, and other regions. But if you go into my presentation and you go to an area I did not cover, which is the access to finance, that issue, I have included there a link where a full module on how to do project preparation, including developing bankable projects, is covered. So that's what I would contribute and turn it over.
Thank you, Mandy.
Thanks very much. So the first question that I want to address is the issue about how do we do long-term monitoring. And I don't have the answer, but I'll tell you where I would look. I would look at institutions that do long-term monitoring, and those are academic institutions. So once again, where are the partnerships with academia to set up these longitudinal studies that are required to deeply understand what's needed, what's working, and what's not working? Then secondly, I want to respond to the issue from Senegal to say, first of all, that the Green Climate Fund and the Adaptation Fund do support project development, as do the UN agencies, but not enough. And this is a call to Galila and the UN agencies. To say that as a direct access entity, I often feel that I'm competing with the UN agencies, and that's incredibly unhelpful. And I know why it happens. It's because of the business model of the UN agencies. Can we change the business model of the UN agencies so that direct access entities are really better supported to develop projects and programs that are bankable? So it's not about modules, it's about proper partnerships that build institutional capacity to do this. And again, it's a question. I don't know what the answer is, but I hope that the more times I ask the question, the closer we'll come to the partnerships and the answer. Thanks.
Thank you, Mandy. Mr. Wande?
Thank you very much. I think I would just reflect on the last question from Senegal. Part of, in the experiences that we have had, for instance, with the Africa group of negotiators in the process of developing INDCs, is that whilst other actors were developing guidelines for the development of INDCs, the Africa group itself you had an internal team that was tasked to develop guidelines on INDCs with specific application to African countries. And this appeared to have spared a number of African countries to develop their INDCs, because there was a document that was being discussed in the strategy meetings, and that reflected more their needs. In this respect, I think what can happen also within the aspects of developing proposals is an aspect of peer-to-peer learning, even though some of these guidelines exist from the GCF, from the Adaptation Fund. The way of immediately having some skills developed in our experiences is that when you have peer-to-peer learning, organizing countries, either two countries on a bilateral level, ones that have already developed proposals and are successful, with countries that are in the process of developing their own proposals, it can make a big difference in terms of getting these documents ready, just having some peer-to-peer learning also.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. And thank you, I would like to say thank you to all three panelists, and also they shared their expertise and also the very in-depth questions. But this kind of interactive mode will continue, because the next session will be, actually we're going to have a breakup session. And first of all, I would like to say thank you to all the three panelists to share their views. And if your time allows, please also stay on and join the join the breakout groups discussions and share your views again. So thank you very much. And now we move on to the next session, but the round of pros. So now I would like to suggest to break up to 3 groups, but the 3 breakout groups discussions, each addressing one of the 3 subtopics, actually they're the same, will take place simultaneously for a total of, let's say, 40 minutes. The 3 breakout groups are free to use a corner, but it's already allocated. If you look at, this is a group number 1. Here, by the window, that's group number 3. And by the back door,